For centuries, whispers have surrounded the Vatican. Deep beneath its marble floors lies a labyrinth of vaults that few have ever seen. Some believe those chambers hold fragments of a story older than the church itself, a story suggesting that the Bible once spoke not only of angels, but of beings from the heavens that ancient peoples called the Anunnaki. The Vatican has preserved every page of its sacred history for more than 1,500 years. Inside its hidden archive rest millions of manuscripts, letters from popes, maps of forgotten empires, and early versions of the Bible copied by hand as empires rose and fell. Yet not all of these texts have been shared with the world. What might lie in those sealed collections, waiting to reshape what humanity believes about its own beginning? Long before Christianity, the Sumerians wrote of gods who descended from the sky to guide humankind. They named them the Anunnaki, the children of the heavens. Their stories describe gifts of knowledge, architecture, and law. Centuries later, the book of Genesis would echo a familiar idea. The sons of God came down to the daughters of men. In the lost book of Enoch, later removed from the canon, those same figures were called the Watchers, bringers of forbidden wisdom cast down for what they revealed. Across civilizations, the same pattern returns. Knowledge descends, then disappears. When the early church assembled the Bible, countless writings were judged, chosen, or left behind. Some were preserved in silence, while others were lost to time. What decided which stories became holy scripture and which remained unseen? The Vatican's vaults may hold that answer, resting somewhere between faith and forgotten history. Tonight, we explore that mystery. We follow the trail through the Vatican's private archives, the vanished books of the Bible, and the ancient stories that mirror the tale of the Anunnaki. And we explore the theory that the Vatican's alliance with NASA may be more than science, a quiet search for the world the ancients once called home. If you are still here, stay with us. Do you believe the Vatican holds a piece of history the world was never allowed to know? If you do, comment yes below. If not, comment no, and tell us why. If the Bible once contained a truth about the Anunnaki, being said to have descended from the heavens, then the last surviving trace of that truth may not lie in a desert ruin or a lost tablet, but deep beneath Vatican City itself. Few ever see it. Beneath the marble streets and chapels of the Holy See lies one of the most restricted archives on earth, the Vatican Apostolic Archive, a vast network of vaults and corridors holding more than 85 kilometers of shelving. It is not a tunnel, but an immense underground library built to preserve 12 centuries of human history. Founded in 1612 by Pope Paul V, the archive was created to safeguard the Church's knowledge and records. Over 400 years later, that mission remains unchanged. Inside those vaults rest more than 35,000 ancient manuscripts and over 1 million letters and decrees, including correspondence between popes and emperors, maps of vanished empires, and records of councils that defined Christian law. Each shelf represents a fragment of the world's memory, and almost none of it is open to the public. Access is granted to only a handful of scholars each year. They must request specific documents by title and date, with no freedom to browse. Photography and video recording are strictly prohibited inside the archive. Even today, the archive's full catalogue has never been released. According to Smithsonian Magazine in 2019, for every 1,000 documents stored in the Vatican archive, only one has ever been made public. The remaining 999 remain sealed, their contents known only to those permitted within its walls. Among the texts preserved, there are early, hand-copied versions of the Bible, known as the pre-Nicene manuscripts, written before the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century. When the early church decided which Gospels and writings would form the official canon, these older versions, recorded in Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, predate the unified scripture we know today. Linguists have noted that some contain traces of Mesopotamian phrasing, echoes of Sumer and Babylon, where tales of celestial visitors were first inscribed in clay. Historian Dr. Christopher Hodap, who studied several fragments from the 4th and 5th centuries, identified subtle but remarkable variations. Certain lines of Genesis appear in a different order, and divine beings are described not as angels but as sons of the sky or watchers. In Aramaic and Akkadian, the word watchers shares the same linguistic root as the Sumerian Anunnaki, meaning those who from the heavens came. If this connection is genuine, the earliest writers of Genesis may have drawn from stories far older than Israel itself, stories describing beings descending from the sky to shape humanity. The Vatican has never confirmed the existence of these alternate texts, but its discretion only deepens curiosity. Every shelf is monitored, and every request is recorded. Documents are stored in climate-controlled rooms beneath layers of stone, protected not just by archivists but by policy. Researchers may view only the pages they are authorized to see, and translation or reproduction is not permitted without approval. To the outside world, the rest remains unknown. Officially, the Church explains that secrecy is a form of preservation, arguing that unrestricted access could damage fragile materials or lead to misinterpretation. However, some historians suggest that this control also maintains a consistent theological narrative, centered on divine creation without celestial intermediaries. If earlier manuscripts tell a different story, one involving beings who came from the sky, then the Vatican's caution may be less about secrecy and more about safeguarding interpretation. For now, that possibility remains sealed behind stone walls and iron gates. Yet if such writings do exist, they may hold the key to a question that has intrigued civilization for 5 millennia. Did the Bible once tell the same story the Sumerians told, and has the Vatican preserved that story through time? If you are still here, give this video a like to help more people find it. In the next part, we uncover the ancient world's first written record of those beings, the Anunnaki, the first gods from the heavens. Long before the Bible was written, before the prophets, and before the word angel ever existed, the people of ancient Mesopotamia carved another story into clay. On those tablets, they spoke of powerful beings who descended from the sky. The name they gave them was Anunnaki, a word that appears more than 2,000 times in Sumerian inscriptions discovered across the ruins of Nippur and Uruk in what is now Iraq. According to archaeologist Samuel Noah Kramer of the University of Pennsylvania, who first translated many of these tablets in the 1950s, the Anunnaki were described as deities who came down from the heavens to establish order upon the earth. They were not abstract gods or metaphors for natural forces. The Sumerians depicted them as real figures, radiant and tall, descending to teach humankind laws, architecture, and the foundations of civilization. The Sumerians believed their gods lived on another world, a heavenly realm that could only be reached through the sky. Their myths describe a time when the Anunnaki came to Earth and built the first cities, teaching humans to farm, to write, and to build temples that aligned perfectly with the stars. In the clay archives of Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki are credited with almost every early human achievement, including the calendar, mathematics, astronomy, and irrigation. One of the most important texts describing them is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic preserved from the ruins of Nineveh. In this story, the gods are said to have descended in radiant vessels from the heavens, bringing light and law to a world covered in darkness and water. The phrase radiant vessels, often interpreted as symbolic, has fascinated researchers because it stands apart from the poetic language of other ancient mythologies. Unlike the Greek or Egyptian gods, the Sumerian deities were not eternal spirits but beings who arrived, ruled, and eventually departed, promising to return when the heavens realigned. Another key text, the Epic of Atrahasis, written around 1700 BCE, expands on this idea. It describes the gods labouring on earth to shape the land and extract resources until they grew weary of the work. To solve this, one of them, Enki, proposed creating a new being, humankind, to serve in their place. According to the tablets, Enki mixed the essence of the gods with the clay of the earth, giving rise to the first people. The result was a hybrid creation, mortal yet bearing the spark of the divine. Modern scholars interpret this as an allegory for the birth of civilization, humanity gaining intelligence and responsibility. But others, like Zecharia Sitchin centuries later, suggested that these lines might describe something more literal, perhaps a memory of genetic manipulation by beings who were not divine but advanced. Whether symbolic or not, the image is powerful, the making of humankind from earth under the guidance of beings who came from the sky, an image later mirrored in the book of Genesis. In Sumerian belief, the Anunnaki were not a single figure but a council, the offspring of Anu, the great god of the heavens. Among them, two names appear again and again: Enki, the god of knowledge and water, and Enlil, the god of command and authority. Their rivalry defined the mythic history of the world. Enki sought to uplift humankind, giving them wisdom and freedom. Enlil, in contrast, saw humans as noisy, troublesome, and short-lived. This conflict culminated in the story of a great flood, a catastrophe sent by Enlil to cleanse the earth, while Enki secretly warned a righteous man to build a vessel and survive. The story of the flood in the Epic of Atrahasis predates the biblical tale of Noah by more than 1,000 years, yet the parallels are undeniable: a divine warning, a massive vessel, and the preservation of life. The Bible would later reshape this story in its own image, but the foundation of the tale, and perhaps its origin, lies in these older Sumerian tablets. To the Sumerians, the Anunnaki were both creators and rulers. Their temples, called ziggurats, were built as stairways to the sky, symbolic bridges between earth and the realm of the gods. Each major city had its own patron Anunnaki, and its temple served as a meeting point between the divine and the mortal. The priests who served there kept detailed astronomical records, charting the movements of the stars and planets as if waiting for something, perhaps the return of the gods who had once descended from them. The more archaeologists uncovered from Mesopotamia, the more advanced the Sumerians appeared. They invented writing, mathematics, and urban law seemingly overnight without any known predecessors. The suddenness of this leap in knowledge has puzzled historians for over a century. How did one small region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers produce the foundations of civilization so rapidly? The Sumerians themselves gave a simple answer: the Anunnaki taught us. Even mainstream scholars, while rejecting the extraterrestrial theory, acknowledged the sophistication of Sumerian astronomy. They charted every visible planet, recognized the precession of the equinoxes, and divided the circle into 360 degrees, a system still used today. Their precision suggests generations of observation, or perhaps the preservation of knowledge that predates their own civilization. For those who see the Anunnaki not as gods but as visitors, these details form a pattern, the same pattern that later reappears in the Bible: divine beings descending, shaping humanity, teaching forbidden knowledge, and then vanishing. Whether fact or myth, the Sumerian record stands as the oldest written account of beings who came from the sky to guide humankind. If the Vatican truly holds alternate versions of Genesis, texts that speak of sons of the sky rather than angels, then those stories may trace their lineage all the way back here, to the Sumerian plane. The same story told in different tongues, reshaped by faith and time, but carrying the same message, that humanity's creators once walked among them. Centuries later, that story would return, rewritten in Holy Scripture and reinterpreted for a new world, one where the Anunnaki were no longer called gods, but something else entirely: the sons of God. Genesis 6-4 reads, "The sons of God came down to the daughters of men, and they bore them children, the giants of old, the mighty men of renown." It is one of the most mysterious lines in the entire Bible. Who were these sons of God, and why were their children giants? For centuries, theologians debated whether the verse referred to angels, rulers, or metaphors of good and evil. But other ancient texts that did not make it into the official Bible tell a story that sounds far more literal. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd searching the cliffs of Qumran near the Dead Sea stumbled upon sealed jars containing thousands of scrolls. These were the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest known Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible and other religious works, some written over 2,000 years ago. Among them were fragments of books that had long been lost, including one that expanded on the mystery of Genesis 6, the Book of Enoch. In these writings, the sons of God were not metaphorical beings, but a group of celestial watchers sent to observe humanity. According to the text, they descended from the heavens, fascinated by the daughters of men, and took them as wives. From their union came the Nephilim, beings of immense stature and knowledge. These watchers taught humankind the secrets of metalworking, medicine, and astronomy, knowledge said to have been forbidden. In punishment for breaking divine law, they were cast out, bound beneath the earth until the end of days. Archaeologist Joseph Milik, one of the first scholars to decipher the Qumran scrolls, confirmed that the Book of Enoch preserved a pattern almost identical to Sumerian mythology: beings from the heavens, human contact, the sharing of knowledge, and divine retribution. To Milik, these parallels were not coincidence. They were evidence that the Hebrew tradition had inherited and reinterpreted much older Mesopotamian ideas. The Book of Enoch was once widely read among early Jewish and Christian communities. It was quoted by writers of the New Testament, including the authors of Jude and Peter, and it shaped early Christian angelology, the study of angels and their ranks. In Enoch's vision, the heavens are structured in layers, populated by luminous beings who watch over the earth. These beings are not distant or symbolic. They act, they teach, and they fall. Yet, despite its influence, the Book of Enoch disappeared from the Bible. By the 4th century, when the Council of Nika unified Christian scripture, Enoch was declared apocryphal, too controversial, and too divergent from the doctrine of a single divine creation. The Church preferred a story where humanity was shaped directly by God, not by intermediaries who descended from the sky. And so, for more than 1,000 years, the Book of Enoch was lost to the Western world. Only in Ethiopia did copies survive, preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in a language called Ge'ez. When European scholars rediscovered these texts in the 18th century, they were stunned. Passages long thought metaphorical in Genesis now had context, and that context was deeply ancient. The line between angels and the Anunnaki, between divine messengers and celestial visitors, had blurred. The story of the Watchers is not just a theological curiosity. It is a record of how ancient peoples understood the heavens. To the Sumerians, the Anunnaki came from the stars to establish order. To the Hebrews, the Watchers came from heaven and broke that order by teaching forbidden wisdom. In both cases, knowledge descended and was punished. The moral changed, but the pattern remained. Even the word watcher carries a deeper meaning. In Aramaic, it derives from ear, meaning those who are awake. In Sumerian myth, the Anunnaki were also described as those who observed the destinies of men. Across languages and millennia, the same archetype persisted. Higher beings who watched humanity, guided it, and were cast out for defying a greater power. Modern scholars interpret these stories as allegories for human curiosity and rebellion, the quest for knowledge that both elevates and endangers civilization. But for others, these are fragments of a shared memory, passed from Sumer to Babylon to Israel, and finally into the Bible itself. If that is true, then the Vatican's early manuscripts may preserve the missing link between them, the original texts where the Watchers were still called by their older name, the Anunnaki. It is easy to see why such writings would have been hidden. A story suggesting that angels were once physical beings from the heavens, beings who came down, taught, and broke divine law, would challenge not only theology but the foundation of human history. Perhaps that is why for centuries these books remained sealed away, labelled heretical or forbidden. In 1956, Milik concluded his translation of the Book of Giants, a fragment from the same Qumran collection, which describes the offspring of the Watchers roaming the earth, towering in size and power. The flood, he wrote, was sent to erase them. This final echo connects every layer of the myth, Sumer's gods, Enoch's Watchers, and the Bible's flood, all retelling the same ancient event in different tongues. But something happened. These books, once revered, vanished from the Church's canon. What could make the guardians of faith decide that a story written thousands of years earlier was too dangerous to keep? In the 4th century, the Roman world changed forever. Christianity had grown from a small movement into the faith of an empire. But with that growth came complexity, hundreds of versions of Scripture, each with different stories about God, angels, and the beginning of humankind. In the 4th century of the Common Era, Emperor Constantine decided it was time to bring order. He called together the bishops of the Church in the city of Nicaea, and what they decided there would shape the course of history. The Council of Nika created one official version of the Bible. From that moment, the story of creation, heaven, and the divine had to follow a single path. But unity came at a cost. Dozens of ancient books were left out, texts that early Christians and Jews had once read freely. Among them were the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Book of Giants. These were not minor writings. They told stories that filled the gaps between heaven and earth, between gods and men, and they described events that sounded far older than the Bible itself. In the Book of Enoch, a man is taken up to the heavens in a fiery chariot. There he sees beings of shining light who come down to teach humanity forbidden knowledge, how to forge metal, read the stars, and heal the sick. The Book of Jubilees speaks of angels keeping records of human history, measuring time in great cycles that repeat like the movement of the planets. The Book of Giants tells of the children born between the sons of heaven and the daughters of men, the same giants of old mentioned briefly in Genesis. For the early church, these stories were controversial. They blurred the line between the divine and creation. They suggested that heavenly beings, not only God, played a role in shaping humankind. To the bishops at Nicaea, that was unacceptable. The idea of beings descending from the sky sounded too similar to the old traditions of Sumer and Babylon, so they made a decision. Those books would be removed. The official Bible would keep only the stories that supported one central truth: one creator, one creation, one heaven. Over time, the excluded texts vanished from sight. Some were destroyed, others were preserved by monks who believed they were too important to lose, but not all disappeared. In the mountains of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept the Book of Enoch as part of its Bible. When European explorers rediscovered it in the 1700s, it surprised scholars. Here was a book that spoke about angels descending to earth long before the story of Genesis was ever written. It even described events that matched the Sumerian myths of the Anunnaki, beings who came from the sky to share knowledge with humanity and were later cast out. These were not just coincidences. They suggested a pattern, the same story told in different ages and in different tongues. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Hebrews called them the Watchers. The Bible called them the sons of God. But the core remained, beings from the heavens who came to earth, shared knowledge, and were punished for it. By the Middle Ages, most copies of these texts had been sealed inside monasteries or private collections. According to Smithsonian Magazine, only about 1 out of every 1,000 documents in the Vatican Archive has ever been made public. The rest remain sealed, locked behind layers of stone and preservation. In 2012, the Vatican launched a small digital project to show the world a glimpse of what lies inside. Among the items shown were a few pages of Enoch and Jubilees written in Ge'ez and early Latin. But the complete texts, the ones that could fill the missing links in the story of creation, were not revealed. Why guard them so carefully for so long? Some historians say the answer is simple: to maintain unity of belief. Faith depends on consistency. If millions of believers were suddenly told that the Bible they have known for centuries may have missing chapters, or that the angels of Scripture were once described as beings who descended from the stars, it could create confusion among the faithful. The Vatican may view silence as a form of preservation, a way to protect understanding rather than conceal it. But there are deeper reasons as well. In the Middle Ages, faith was not only spiritual guidance, it was also influence over kingdoms and cultures. The Church united rulers, advised leaders, and shaped nations through shared belief. To acknowledge that other beings might have influenced humanity's creation could have disrupted that unity. In a time when faith was the foundation of law and order, such ideas could have divided societies. Another reason is consistency. The Church has long taught that divine revelation concluded with the official Bible. Anything beyond that could invite endless debate and confusion. For the Church, keeping certain texts reserved was not deception, it was preservation. By maintaining one coherent story and safeguarding others, they could keep the message of God simple and clear. Yet others believe there may be more to the silence. Historian Michael Beigant, author of The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, suggested that the Vatican may be protecting earlier versions of Genesis, ones that describe beings from the stars who influenced early humanity. If those versions were ever made public, they could link the Bible directly to the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki. That connection could change everything we think we know about where humanity came from and who our creators might have been. What if the Vatican's discretion is not about secrecy, but about readiness? Some scholars suggest that it may simply be preserving ancient knowledge until humanity is ready to understand it fully. Rather than concealing history, the Church could be safeguarding records of human origins, protecting them from misinterpretation or confusion. This may also explain why the Vatican refers to its collection as the Apostolic Archive instead of the Secret Archive. In Latin, secretum means private. What is private is not forbidden. It is simply held in reserve until the time is right to share it. To its custodians, some parts of history might belong not to the past but to the future. Up next, we uncover the Vatican's link to NASA and whether the world's oldest religious institution is quietly watching the stars, searching for the home of the Anunnaki. Most people think of the Vatican as a place of prayer, not science, but few realize that for centuries it has also looked toward the stars. The Church's interest in astronomy began as early as the 16th century, when popes built observatories to calculate the dates of Easter by studying the movements of the sun and planets. Over time, that curiosity grew into something far greater, a quiet collaboration between faith and science that continues today. High in the mountains of Arizona, far from the crowded streets of Rome, stands a facility known as the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, or VATT. It is operated by the Vatican Observatory in collaboration with several American universities and NASA. The site was chosen for its clear skies and minimal light pollution, ideal for observing the universe. But what fascinates many researchers is not the telescope itself, but what it represents, one of the world's oldest institutions working alongside the most advanced space agency on Earth. At Mount Graham, the observatory also houses a powerful infrared instrument known as Lucifer, a name that drew wide attention when it was first revealed to the public. Despite the striking acronym, which stands for Large Binocular Telescope Near Infrared Utility with Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research, it became a topic of endless discussion. To the Church, it is simply a scientific instrument for studying distant galaxies. But to historians and those who study ancient texts, the symbolism is remarkable. An institution that once dismissed stories about celestial visitors is now using one of the most advanced telescopes in the world to study the heavens. Officially, the Vatican Observatory exists to explore creation through science, yet some researchers have wondered if there might be a deeper purpose. Certain theorists suggest that the partnership between the Vatican and NASA could involve more than studying stars, perhaps a shared effort to understand what ancient civilizations once described as worlds beyond our own. NASA has publicly dismissed the idea of Nibiru, the so-called planet of the gods mentioned in Sumerian tablets, as a myth. The Vatican's position, however, has been more philosophical. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI made a statement that caught global attention. To deny the existence of other worlds is to deny the creative freedom of God. And in an interview with L'Osservatore Romano, Father José Gabriel Funes, director of the Vatican Observatory, added, "If other intelligent beings exist, they would also be part of creation and not in conflict with faith." It was a subtle yet significant shift. For centuries, heaven had been viewed as a purely spiritual concept. Now, voices within the Church suggested that the discovery of life beyond Earth would not contradict belief. It would expand it. Why this openness? Some scholars believe the Vatican is preparing for a future in which the discovery of life beyond Earth becomes undeniable. If NASA were ever to confirm intelligent life elsewhere, faith traditions around the world would face profound questions. By acknowledging that other worlds could fit within creation, the Vatican could help bridge belief and discovery. Others see something deeper, that perhaps the Church understands humanity's story to be older and wider than we currently imagine. For centuries, the Vatican preserved texts that spoke of beings from the heavens who descended to Earth. Now, its scientists are among those exploring the skies. The irony is not lost on historians. An institution that once silenced such ideas now funds the study of the very cosmos those stories described. A church that once excluded the Book of Enoch, with its accounts of messengers descending from the heavens, now supports dialogue about the possibility of life beyond our planet. It may not be coincidence at all. In an age when space agencies search for exoplanets and probe the edges of the solar system, the Vatican may no longer fear what lies beyond the stars. Instead, it may seek to understand what ancient people truly saw and recorded. After all, if the stories of the Anunnaki were inspired by real celestial events, and if a planet once passed near Earth, then its traces might still exist somewhere beyond Neptune. Modern astronomers call it Planet 9. Though still unconfirmed, its gravitational influence appears strong enough to affect distant objects. Could this be what both NASA and the Vatican are quietly searching for? The world that once inspired the oldest stories of gods and messengers from the heavens? No one can say for certain. But one thing is clear. Both institutions, one grounded in faith and the other in science, are looking at the same sky and asking the same timeless questions about creation and life beyond our own. This collaboration marks a turning point. For the first time, faith and science are not opposing forces, but partners in curiosity. Maybe they have always been searching for the same understanding, just through different languages. Whether that understanding leads to the divine, to the stars, or to something that connects them both, remains to be seen. Do you think the Vatican and NASA are truly searching for something out there, or simply searching for meaning within? Nibiru is a legendary planet mentioned in ancient Sumerian inscriptions, described by the ancients as the dwelling place of the Anunnaki. According to ancient belief, this world completes its orbit every 3,600 years, marking the return of beings said to have brought knowledge and civilization to humankind. The Sumerians believed the Anunnaki would return to Earth when Nibiru once again draws near. We have created a detailed video exploring this mystery, showing how the story of Nibiru continues to be linked to the Vatican, the Bible, and the enduring question of humanity's true origins. You can watch it right here on our channel after this video. Across history, one lesson repeats. Truth never disappears, it only waits. Whether hidden in the sands of Sumer, sealed beneath the Vatican, or written in the stars, knowledge always finds its way back. And maybe that is the real message behind it all, that faith and curiosity were never meant to be enemies. They are two paths leading to the same place, understanding who we are and where we came from. So as we look to the sky tonight, remember, the story of humanity may not be finished. It may just be rediscovering itself, piece by piece, in the light of a universe that has always been watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. Until next time, good night.